The U.S. Prometheus was a symbol of hope and mercy in the galaxy. A hospital ship, its mission was to heal, not to fight. Floating in the cold depths of space, it carried medical supplies and medical crews, providing aid to wounded soldiers, civilians, and even alien species in need of help. The crew consisted of doctors, nurses, and support staff who had dedicated their lives to saving others. For them, the mission was simple: to make a difference in a universe often torn by war and violence. They were used to seeing suffering, but they were also used to being the ones who helped, the ones who gave hope. However, no one expected the Valkyrians, a brutal and war-hungry alien race, to be the ones to shatter this peaceful mission. The attack came without warning, without any signs of danger. One moment, the U.S. Prometheus was calmly floating through space, performing its life-saving work. The next moment, a massive explosion rocked the ship. The lights flickered, and alarms blared through the ship's hallways. The crew scrambled to figure out what was happening, but it was already too late. The Valkyrians were upon them. In seconds, the Prometheus shields, which were designed to protect the ship from minor space debris and environmental hazards, were overwhelmed. The Valkyrians had no interest in the hospital's mission. To them, the ship was nothing more than a soft target, an easy way to send a message. They launched their attack with ruthless efficiency, firing on the ship's engines, disabling them with one brutal strike. The ship, once a beacon of peace, was now a sitting duck. The crew fought back as best as they could, but they were outmatched. The Valkyrians were known for their savage tactics and sheer brutality. They didn't need to negotiate. They didn't need to make deals. They just took what they wanted, and in this case, they wanted to destroy. They weren't here to steal medical supplies or resources. They were here to send a message to the galaxy. No one is safe. The first few minutes of the attack were chaotic. The sound of explosions echoed through the ship. Medical staff, who had spent their lives healing, were now forced to defend their vessel. Nurses and doctors grabbed whatever makeshift weapons they could find, while the combat-trained personnel tried to hold back the invaders. But the Valkyrians came with overwhelming force. The hospital ship had no chance against them. As the invaders breached the outer hull, they stormed through the hallways, firing on anyone who moved. Their weapons were advanced, capable of slicing through armor and metal with ease. The crew tried to hide, tried to evacuate the patients, but there were too many wounded to move quickly. The hospital was a maze of corridors, filled with the sounds of screams and the stench of smoke and burning metal. The Valkyrians, without mercy, advanced with brutal force, shooting anyone who stood in their way. Meanwhile, the captain of the U.S. Prometheus, Captain Eleanor Price, was on the bridge, trying to maintain control. She was the one person who remained calm as the situation escalated. Her fingers flew across the console, trying to send a distress signal to Earth, but the communications array was damaged in the first wave of the attack. She knew that time was running out. If the ship was lost, there would be no one to warn the galaxy about the Valkyrians' terror. In the chaos, Captain Price gave the order to evacuate as many as possible, but it was clear that survival was becoming a distant hope. As the Valkyrians set fire to key systems, the Prometheus began to lose power. The lights flickered and died, plunging the ship into darkness, save for the red emergency lights flashing on the walls. The Valkyrians, having caused enough destruction, began to retreat. They had done what they came to do: leave a message for the rest of the galaxy. As they made their way to their ships, they left the Prometheus in ruins. Fires raged across the ship, the air thick with smoke and dust. The crew that remained on board could only watch as the invaders departed. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a massacre. Captain Price's mind raced as she tried to assess the situation. The ship was barely operational, and the damage was extensive. The medical bay was a mess, with both patients and staff wounded or killed. But even in the face of destruction, the crew still held on to one thing: hope. As the raiders left, there was a brief moment of silence, and then the survivors began to work. They rushed to the communication array, attempting to send out a distress signal, to warn Earth of what had happened, to call for help. The signal went out, but it wasn't strong enough to reach Earth yet. The U.S. Prometheus was floating in space, crippled, a ghost of its former self. But its message was clear. Humanity would never stand by while innocents were attacked. This was not just an attack on a hospital. It was an attack on humanity's core values, and Earth would answer. The message sent out was just the beginning. The Valkyrians had made their first mistake. They had underestimated the power of the human spirit. Captain Price, despite the odds, refused to give in. They would survive this, and they would make sure the rest of the galaxy knew the cost of crossing Earth. The stage was set for revenge, and Earth's fleet was ready to answer the call. But the U.S. Prometheus was still far from being out of danger. Would the signal reach Earth in time? Would help arrive before the ship was lost forever? The Valkyrians had no idea what kind of retaliation they had just provoked, and it would be more than they could ever imagine. The attack on the U.S. Prometheus was just the beginning. The human response would shake the very stars themselves. The Valkyrians had struck, but Earth was ready to strike back. The distress signal from the U.S. Prometheus had barely left its weakened systems when Earth's fleet received the call. The message, distorted and incomplete, was enough to send shockwaves through the command centers back home. Humanity was under attack, and it wasn't just an isolated incident. The Valkyrians, a vicious alien race known for their unrelenting violence, had dared to strike at one of Earth's most peaceful symbols, a hospital ship. In Earth's Central Command, Admiral Michael Reeves stood before a wall of screens displaying various reports from around the galaxy. He knew that the U.S. Prometheus was in dire straits, but he didn't realize the extent of the damage until he watched the first video feed. The ship was in ruins, floating helplessly in space, its lights flickering on the brink of going out. The images of brave crew members rushing to save the wounded, even as the Valkyrians' ruthless attack tore apart their vessel, filled the room with a palpable sense of rage. This is no longer just a rescue mission, Admiral Reeves muttered, his fists clenched. The anger in his voice was clear. It's a declaration of war. The Earth fleet had never faced a threat like this before. The Valkyrians were notorious for their brutal tactics, often leaving entire civilizations destroyed in their wake. They were a force feared by many across the galaxy, and yet humanity had always managed to hold its own, relying on wit, strategy, and sheer determination to survive. But now, with one of their hospital ships attacked and lives lost, the lines between defense and retaliation blurred. The U.S. Prometheus wasn't just a hospital ship, it was a symbol of everything humanity stood for: compassion, hope, and resilience. Admiral Reeves knew the time had come to respond, but not in the way the Valkyrians expected. Earth's war fleet was vast, and it was more than capable of retaliation, but there was something more important to consider. Humanity didn't fight like the Valkyrians. Humans weren't ruthless conquerors. They fought for something bigger. For family, for friends, for a better future. The Admiral ordered a full-scale mobilization. The fleet's primary goal was clear: rescue the survivors, protect Earth's interests, and make sure the Valkyrians would never strike at humanity again. The ships were prepared for an immediate launch. The Valkyrian invaders had made a grave mistake, and now Earth's wrath would come crashing down on them. On the U.S. Prometheus, Captain Price worked tirelessly to keep her crew alive. Despite the damage, she managed to send out a faint distress signal, hoping against hope that Earth would hear them. The situation was grim. The fire had spread through most of the ship, and the air supply was running low. Medical staff who had survived were doing their best to tend to the wounded and ensure that everyone had a chance to escape before it was too late. But time was running out. A new threat emerged. The Valkyrians had left, but they weren't finished. A scout ship was still orbiting the area, ensuring that there were no survivors. It was clear the invaders wanted to make sure that the U.S. Prometheus wouldn't be able to make it back to Earth. nor would any distress signal reach its destination. But Captain Price wasn't about to let that happen. She knew that Earth was the last hope for the crew. If they didn't get the message out, they would be left to die alone in the cold vacuum of space. The crew was starting to lose hope. They were out of food and water, and the fire still raged. Yet Captain Price never faltered. She ordered her team to hold their ground and keep working. No one was leaving without giving their all. She knew that every minute counted. The Prometheus was wounded, but not defeated. Back on Earth, Admiral Reeves and his fleet began their journey toward the coordinates of the U.S. Prometheus. The ships were ready for battle. The crew members aboard the vessels were motivated by the thought of revenge. But more than that, they were driven by the idea of rescuing their people. The message from the Prometheus was clear. If humanity was to survive, they needed to act fast. The Earth fleet was ready, their weapons primed and their shields activated. In the vastness of space, the distance between Earth and the Prometheus felt like an eternity, but the fleet pushed forward, faster than ever before. Their ships moved through the void like shadows, ready to strike back at the aggressors who had dared to challenge humanity's spirit. But as the fleet moved closer to the wreckage of the Prometheus, they realized that the Valkyrians had set a trap. More ships emerged from the shadows, surrounding the hospital ship's location. The Valkyrians had returned, and they were ready to finish the job. Admiral Reeves clenched his jaw. His fleet had already been prepared for the possibility of encountering resistance. The Valkyrians had made a grave miscalculation, underestimating humanity's resolve. The battle for the U.S. Prometheus was about to begin, and it was going to be unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The stakes were high. Earth's war fleet was massive, but the Valkyrians were no less prepared for a fight. The battle would not be easy, but one thing was certain: humanity would never back down. Not now. Not ever. The U.S. Prometheus had been attacked, but the world was watching, and Earth was ready to strike back. As the Earth fleet closed in, Captain Price's voice crackled through the comms, her tone steady despite the circumstances. "We're holding on," she said. "We'll make it through this. Earth will hear us." And in that moment, the battle for the U.S. Prometheus truly began. The Valkyrians would learn that when you strike at humanity, you awaken something more dangerous than just a war fleet. You awaken the very heart of Earth itself. And that, the Valkyrians would soon learn, was the last thing they ever wanted to face. The Earth fleet arrived in the vicinity of the U.S. Prometheus, but the situation was far from simple. The Valkyrians had already established a strong defensive perimeter around the disabled hospital ship, and it was clear that their intention was to prevent any rescue mission from succeeding. The Earth warships had prepared for a fight, but no one expected the Valkyrians to strike with such overwhelming force. Admiral Reeves studied the enemy ships on his command screen. The Valkyrians' vessels were powerful, designed for destruction, and they had the advantage of numbers. Still, Earth had the element of surprise. With the U.S. Prometheus hanging in the balance, every second counted. The fleet was made up of the most advanced ships Earth had ever created, battleships with weapons capable of obliterating enemy craft in mere seconds, and stealth ships that could slip past enemy lines undetected. But this time, Earth's greatest weapon wasn't just its advanced technology, it was its fierce resolve. The Valkyrians had underestimated humanity's willingness to fight for each other. Admiral Reeves issued the command to engage, and the fleet surged forward. The opening salvo of laser fire lit up the blackness of space, striking the Valkyrian ships in a blaze of energy. The Earth warships held nothing back, unleashing everything they had. But the Valkyrians were swift, evading some of the blasts and returning fire with deadly precision. The energy beams from their ships tore through the void, striking Earth's fleet with such force that several ships were jolted backward, their shields buckling under the pressure. On the U.S. Prometheus, Captain Price watched the battle unfold on the few remaining working screens. Her crew was still alive, but their resources were dwindling fast. The Valkyrians had done their damage, and the hospital ship's power reserves were almost gone. The crew had no means of escape if the fight continued much longer. But they weren't about to give up without a fight. "We can still make it," Captain Price said, her voice calm but filled with determination. She turned to her first officer, Lieutenant Nolan, who was monitoring the battle from the command deck. "The fleet is engaging," Lieutenant Nolan reported, his eyes fixed on the screens, tracking the movements of the Earth warships. "But the Valkyrians are well prepared. They're deploying reinforcements as we speak." Captain Price's eyes narrowed. The Valkyrians had never fought with a sense of mercy, and she knew that they would stop at nothing to ensure that the Prometheus was destroyed. But humanity wasn't going to let that happen. Not today. "Communicate with the fleet. Tell them we're not leaving this ship without a fight," Captain Price ordered. She stood up from her seat, gripping the edge of the console as the ship shook violently from another blast. "We need to buy them time. Whatever it takes." Lieutenant Nolan hesitated for a moment, glancing at the damage reports streaming across his console. "Are you sure, Captain? We can't hold much longer." "We'll hold," Captain Price said firmly, "until they get here." Meanwhile, in the heart of the battle, Earth's fleet was slowly gaining the upper hand. The Valkyrian ships were formidable, but they were also overconfident. They hadn't anticipated that Earth's fleet would be so resilient. Each time they thought they had a clear advantage. The Earth ships adapted, using clever tactics and their superior technology to turn the tide in their favor. Admiral Reeves watched the battle unfold from the command deck of his flagship. The tension in the air was thick as each ship took its turn firing, dodging, and countering. Despite the overwhelming odds, Earth's ships held strong. They fought with every bit of energy they had for their people, for their fallen comrades, and for the crew of the U.S. Prometheus. "We've lost 2 ships," one of the officers reported, his voice strained. "But we've damaged their lead ships. We're pushing them back, sir." Admiral Reeves nodded, his eyes never leaving the screens. "Keep pressing them. We're not backing down now." The battle raged on, with the Earth fleet's ships closing in on the Valkyrian perimeter. The Prometheus, still in the center of the conflict, remained a target for the Valkyrians, who continued to pound it with energy blasts, hoping to finish what they started. But as the fleet closed in, the Valkyrians began to falter. Their formations were starting to crack under the pressure. On the Prometheus, Captain Price turned to her crew. "Prepare for emergency evacuation," she ordered. "We'll make sure everyone gets out. Lieutenant Nolan, get those escape pods ready." "We're not done yet, Captain," Lieutenant Nolan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "We're fighting for the fleet. We're fighting for Earth." Captain Price gave him a resolute nod. "Then we're not leaving until we've done everything we can." As the Valkyrians retreated under the onslaught of Earth's fleet, it became clear that the tide of the battle was shifting. But victory wasn't certain yet. The U.S. Prometheus was still far from safe, and the battle had drained resources from the Earth fleet. Their ships were damaged, and the Valkyrians had only retreated temporarily, not fully defeated. The fight wasn't over, but Captain Price's message had already been delivered to Earth's fleet. Humanity would not be pushed aside. The Valkyrians had attacked Earth's hospital ship, but in doing so, they had awakened a force that was far more powerful than they had ever realized. Earth wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for every life they had ever saved, every wounded soldier they had helped, and every person who had ever been in need of their compassion. The battle for the U.S. Prometheus was a turning point. The Valkyrians would soon realize that humanity was not only capable of vengeance, but also of something much more powerful: unity. And with that unity came an unshakable will to fight, to protect, and to ensure that no one, no matter how big, no matter how strong, would ever threaten humanity again. The battle was far from over, and the situation aboard the U.S. Prometheus was growing more desperate by the second. Captain Price and her crew had done everything they could to hold their ground, but the reality was clear. The Valkyrians had come prepared for a fight, and their numbers were overwhelming. The Earth fleet had pushed the enemy back for now, But the Valkyrians were regrouping, and they were far from finished. "Admiral Reeves," Captain Price's voice crackled over the comms, a calm authority in every word. "We've held them off for now, but we can't keep this up forever. The Prometheus is still vulnerable. We need more time. Please, hurry." Admiral Reeves, aboard his flagship, clenched his fists. The urgency in Captain Price's voice was a reminder of what was at stake. This wasn't just a battle. This was the survival of Earth's people, the defense of everything they stood for. He wasn't about to let that slip away. "We're almost there, Captain," Admiral Reeves responded. "Hold on just a little longer." The Earth fleet was now pressing deeper into Valkyrian territory, fighting tooth and nail to keep the invaders at bay. Each ship was on edge, knowing that every move mattered. The Valkyrians were regrouping, their tactics becoming more coordinated as they sought to break through Earth's lines and finish what they had started. But Earth wasn't giving up. Not now, not ever. Captain Price's mind raced as she watched the Valkyrians on her screens. Their ships, though battered, were still formidable. But she knew something the Valkyrians didn't. Humanity was not about to back down. She turned to her crew, who were still working tirelessly, doing everything they could to keep the Prometheus from falling into the enemy's hands. Every member of her crew had one goal in mind: to survive, and to ensure that the enemy paid dearly for their attack. "Status on the escape pods?" Captain Price asked, her tone steady, but her eyes betraying the growing tension. Lieutenant Nolan, the first officer, looked up from his console. "We've prepared the pods, Captain, but we're not sure how many of the crew will be able to get out. The Valkyrians are already positioning their ships for a final strike. If we don't act now, we may not have a chance." Captain Price nodded. "We can't abandon ship. We'll fight until the last man is out. Make sure everyone knows that." As the Valkyrians closed in for their final attack, Captain Price and her crew made one last push to fight back. The ship's remaining weapons were activated, firing everything they had in a desperate attempt to repel the oncoming enemy. But the Prometheus was crippled, and each blast from the Valkyrians seemed to strike harder and harder, shaking the entire ship to its core. Outside, the Earth fleet was engaged in a fierce battle of its own. The Valkyrians had formed a tight defensive circle around the Prometheus, preventing any escape. Their warships were relentlessly pounding Earth's defenses, forcing the fleet back. But the Earth ships weren't retreating. They were simply regrouping, readying for the next move. In the chaos of battle, Admiral Reeves saw an opening. The Valkyrians were overconfident. They believed they had Earth cornered. But that was their mistake. They underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to turn the tables when all seemed lost. "Now's our chance," Admiral Reeves ordered, his voice sharp. "Move in full force, take out their lead ships, and give the Prometheus the window it needs." Earth's warships surged forward, cutting through the void of space with precision and speed. The Valkyrians, distracted by the sudden shift in tactics, were forced to redirect their fire toward the incoming fleet. It was exactly what Earth needed. The lead Valkyrian ships took the brunt of the attack, their shields crumpling under the relentless barrage from Earth's fleet. As the enemy forces scrambled to adjust, Captain Price saw the opportunity. "Lieutenant Nolan, open the escape pod hatch. Now." With a loud hiss, the doors to the escape pods opened, and crew members began to evacuate in an orderly fashion. There was no time to lose. Every pod that launched was one more chance for survival. The battle was still raging, but the escape was their priority now. Each pod carried a handful of people: doctors, engineers, soldiers, all determined to survive and make it back to Earth. But as the last of the escape pods launched, Captain Price's heart sank. She looked around at the crew who had given everything to protect their ship, their people, and their world. She knew that many of them wouldn't make it out. The Prometheus was on the brink of collapse, its systems failing one by one. She had to make a decision. "Lieutenant Nolan," Captain Price said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't leave the Prometheus in the hands of the Valkyrians. I'm going to stay. I'll give the last orders to the fleet." "No, Captain," Lieutenant Nolan protested, stepping forward. "You can't. The crew." "I've given all I can," she said, her voice steady. "This is my command, Lieutenant. I'll make sure they pay for what they've done. You need to get to safety. It's an order." With a reluctant nod, Lieutenant Nolan turned and left, joining the last of the crew as they boarded the escape pods. Captain Price stood alone at the helm, watching as the last of the pods escaped into the void. She had one final task to complete before she could leave. Captain Price set the Prometheus on a course directly into the heart of the Valkyrian forces. She knew the ship wouldn't survive the journey, but the Valkyrians would never expect it. As the Prometheus charged into the enemy's lines, it erupted in a final blaze of destruction, taking down several Valkyrian ships before it was destroyed. The Prometheus was gone, but its message was clear. Earth wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The fleet watched from a distance as the explosion rocked the battlefield. Admiral Reeves clenched his fists in anger and resolve. The death of the Prometheus would not be in vain. Humanity had been tested, but they had shown the galaxy something the Valkyrians would never forget. When Earth's people are pushed, they fight back harder than anyone could imagine. As the battle raged on, Earth's war fleet pushed forward, determined to finish what they had started. The Valkyrians would learn the true power of humanity, and this time, the stakes were higher than ever. They had attacked Earth's symbol of peace. Now they would face Earth's might. The echoes of the U.S. Prometheus's final sacrifice reverberated across the galaxy. The Valkyrians, for all their strength and firepower, had underestimated the fury that Earth's people could unleash. The explosion of the hospital ship, though a tragic loss, had sent a clear and unmistakable message. The war was far from over. Admiral Reeves stood on the command deck of the Aegis, his flagship, staring out at the debris from the battle. The remnants of the Prometheus floated in space, its remains scattered like broken fragments of a lost dream. But that dream wasn't dead. It had only just begun to take shape. "Admiral," Lieutenant Taylor said, breaking the silence, "we've picked up signals from the survivors. They're regrouping, but the Valkyrians are already pursuing them. We can't let them catch up." Reeves turned slowly, his eyes cold and focused. "No, we can't. We make a stand here. We've lost too much already, but we can't let them destroy everything we'd fought for." The fleet was wounded but not defeated. Earth's forces had taken a hard hit, but the Prometheus's destruction had ignited something in them, a fury, a determination that the Valkyrians could not possibly understand. The people of Earth weren't just defending their homes. They were fighting for their honor, for the lives of those lost, and for the memory of the countless innocents who had died because of this invasion. "Get the fleet in position," Admiral Reeves ordered. "We're going to force them into a corner. It's time for them to see what happens when they attack humanity. They'll never make that mistake again." As the Earth fleet advanced, the Valkyrians were in full pursuit, their ships closing in fast. They thought they had already won. They thought the battle was over. But humanity was not like the other species they had encountered. The Earth fleet, though smaller in number, fought with a resilience and fury that the Valkyrians couldn't match. Captain Price, though lost with the Prometheus, had sparked something in the hearts of Earth's soldiers. Every ship, every soldier, was now fueled by one thought: revenge. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making the Valkyrians pay for their ruthless attack. The Earth fleet formed up, ready to meet the Valkyrians head-on. The distance between the two fleets shrank quickly, and with it, the tension in the air. The crew of the Aegis readied themselves, preparing for the most critical battle of their lives. They were outnumbered, but they were not outmatched. "Admiral, the Valkyrians are locking on," Lieutenant Taylor said, voice tense. "They're preparing to fire." "Let them come," Reeves growled, gripping the armrests of his command chair. "Prepare all weapons, target their lead ships, and fire on my mark." The fleet fell silent. The crew knew what was coming, and they were ready. As the Valkyrian ships loomed larger, the Earth fleet launched everything they had. Missiles, plasma bolts, and railgun shots streaked through space, slamming into the first wave of enemy ships. The Valkyrians retaliated with fire of their own, but Earth's ships were faster, more agile, and deadlier. Direct hit on their flagship. Lieutenant Taylor called out, "We've breached their shields." Admiral Reeves smiled grimly. "That's the first step. Keep up the pressure." The Valkyrian ships staggered under the attack, their once imposing formation beginning to crack. Earth's fleet was relentless, pushing forward with a fury that sent shockwaves through the battlefield. As the Valkyrian forces tried to regroup, they realized that they were being slowly, steadily encircled. The Earth fleet had learned from their earlier mistakes and was now using their superior tactics to wear the Valkyrians down. One by one, the enemy ships were destroyed or disabled, their once pristine hulls crumpling under the force of Earth's relentless assault. The Valkyrians, though powerful, were not prepared for the sheer intensity of humanity's counterattack. They had expected Earth to fall apart in the wake of the Prometheus's destruction, but what they got instead was a full-scale war that would test every ounce of their strength. "Admiral, the Valkyrians are retreating," Lieutenant Taylor shouted, her voice filled with disbelief. "They're pulling back." Admiral Reeves couldn't believe his ears. The Valkyrians, the supposedly invincible invaders, were retreating. The once feared warships, now crippled and scattered, were fleeing back into the depths of space, leaving Earth's fleet victorious in their wake. "Don't let them escape," Reeves barked. "We finish this now. Pursue them with everything we have." The Earth fleet surged forward, cutting off any potential escape routes. The Valkyrians had underestimated humanity's will to fight, and now they would face the full consequences of their error. With a final push, the last of the Valkyrian ships were overwhelmed, and the rest of their forces were scattered across the galaxy. As the final enemy ship was destroyed, Admiral Reeves took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging in relief. The battle was over. The Valkyrians had been driven back, but the cost had been high. The Prometheus was lost, along with countless brave men and women, but their sacrifice had not been in vain. "Victory, Admiral," Lieutenant Taylor said quietly. Reeves nodded, his expression somber. "We've won, but this is just the beginning. The galaxy will know what happens when you mess with Earth. We will never forget." The Earth fleet, battered but unbroken, drifted through the debris of the battle. They had avenged their fallen comrades. But the war was far from over. The Valkyrians had learned a valuable lesson. Humanity was not a species to be trifled with. As the fleet began its journey back home, the crew knew that their victory would echo across the stars. The message had been sent, and the Valkyrians would never forget what Earth was capable of. And for the first time, they truly understood the power of humanity. As Earth's fleet regrouped and began their long journey back home, Admiral Reeves stood on the command deck of the Aegis, staring out at the stars. Victory had come at a heavy price. The Prometheus was gone, and many lives had been lost in the battle, but the Valkyrians had learned a valuable lesson. Humanity was not to be underestimated. "Admiral," Lieutenant Taylor said, breaking the silence, "we've received a transmission from command. They're asking for an immediate report on the battle and the status of the fleet." Reeves nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. He had expected that. The war was far from over, and command would need to know how their forces were faring. But more than that, they would need to understand the gravity of what had just transpired. The message they'd sent to the Valkyrians wasn't just about defeating them. It was about sending a message to the entire galaxy. "Send them the report," Reeves ordered. "Tell them we've won this battle, but the war is far from over. The Valkyrians will be back, and when they return, they'll remember what happened today." The transmission went out, and for a few moments, there was silence on the deck. But it wasn't a comfortable silence. It was one filled with the weight of the decisions that lay ahead. The battle with the Valkyrians had been won, but the scars of that conflict would last far longer than the remnants of the Prometheus. "I want all crew members to have a moment of rest," Reeves said, his voice firm but tired. "We've earned it. But don't forget, we're not finished. The Valkyrians will return, and we'll be ready." As the crew dispersed, Reeves walked to the observation window, his mind heavy with thoughts of the future. The war was not over. It was only just beginning. He knew that the Valkyrians would not let this defeat slide quietly into the history books. They would regroup, rebuild, and return stronger than before. But this time, Earth would be prepared. In the days that followed, the Earth fleet received more and more transmissions from their allies, offering congratulations and support for their victory. However, none of it felt like a true victory to Admiral Reeves. The loss of the Prometheus weighed heavily on his heart. It wasn't just a ship. It was a symbol of everything humanity had been working for: the unity, the strength, the survival of their people in a galaxy that had long seen them as weak. That symbol was now gone, replaced with a message of defiance. Back on Earth, the government began preparing for the inevitable counterattack. They knew the Valkyrians would come again, but this time they would be ready. Earth had learned something vital in the battle: their strength, their resolve, and the power of their unity. It was a lesson they would carry with them into the future. As Admiral Reeves sat in his quarters late one night, he looked over the damage reports and analyzed the Valkyrian fleet's weaknesses. The victory, though hard-fought, had provided valuable intelligence. The Valkyrians were not invincible, and Earth had the technology and ingenuity to fight back. It would take time to fully rebuild and prepare for the next phase of the war. But Earth had time on their side. They were survivors. A soft beep from his console interrupted his thoughts. It was another transmission from command. This one was different. It was direct and to the point. "Prepare for reinforcements. A fleet from the Galactic Council is on its way." Reeves leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. The Galactic Council. They had been watching the war from the sidelines, hesitant to get involved. But now, they were sending reinforcements. It wasn't a sign of support. It was a sign of warning. The Council had always seen humanity as a problem, something that might upset the balance of power in the galaxy. They would never truly embrace Earth as an ally, no matter how many victories humanity achieved. Reeves knew what this meant. The Council would send forces to help Earth, but that help would come with conditions. They would demand that humanity fall in line with the galactic order. They would expect Earth to abandon its independent stance, to become just another cog in the wheel of the Council's power. But Reeves wasn't ready to bow to anyone, not the Valkyrians, and certainly not the Galactic Council. "We'll handle it," he muttered to himself, his voice low and resolute. "We'll handle them all." He turned back to the window, gazing out at the stars once more. There was so much left to do. The Valkyrians weren't the only threat to humanity. The Council, with all their power, was just as dangerous in their own way. But Earth had proven something today. Humans didn't give up. They didn't bow. They fought, and they won. As the Aegis made its way toward Earth's orbit, ready to prepare for the next phase of the war, Admiral Reeves knew one thing for certain: humanity would never be the galaxy's punching bag again. They would stand tall, they would fight, and they would never back down. The future was uncertain, and the battles ahead would be hard. But one thing was clear: the galaxy would never forget what happened here. Earth had struck a blow for all of humanity, and that was a message that would echo across the stars for as long as they lasted. As the Aegis entered Earth's orbit, Admiral Reeves stood on the observation deck, staring out at the planet below. His mind was heavy with the weight of everything that had happened: losses, victories, and the unyielding pressure of the war ahead. Earth had survived the Valkyrian onslaught, but the real test was yet to come. The Galactic Council was sending reinforcements, but what did that truly mean? Would they help Earth, or would they see humanity as a threat to their precious order? The message from the Council was clear. Earth was no longer a fringe player in the galaxy. But what kind of player would humanity choose to be? Would they fall in line, as so many others had before them, or would they forge their own path, for better or worse? Reeves had never been one to follow orders blindly, and that wasn't going to change now. He would lead humanity into this uncertain future, and they would face whatever challenges came with it. If the Council wanted to test Earth's resolve, they would soon find out that humanity was not a species to be easily bent. "Admiral," Lieutenant Taylor said, walking up behind him, "we've received another transmission from the Council. They're demanding a meeting." Reeves sighed, turning toward her. "I can imagine what that's about. They're sending a fleet to help us, but we both know their idea of help is just control in disguise." "We don't have to accept their help," Taylor said, her voice firm. "We can do this on our own." Reeves looked out the window again, his expression hardening. "We've been doing it on our own. The Valkyrians learned it the hard way. The Council, though, they won't be as easy to convince." He turned to face her, determination in his eyes. "Prepare the fleet. We'll meet them. But I'm not negotiating our future. Earth will stand on its own, no matter what they say." The days that followed were filled with preparations. Earth's fleet was battered but not broken, and the crews worked tirelessly to repair their ships and reinforce their defenses. The arrival of the Galactic Council's reinforcements loomed over them like a dark cloud, but no one seemed afraid. They had faced worse, and they had come out stronger for it. When the Council's fleet finally arrived in Earth's orbit, it was nothing short of imposing. Dozens of sleek, advanced warships filled the sky, their presence a reminder of the power the Council wielded. But this time, things were different. Earth was no longer a meek player in the galactic theater. They had proven themselves. They had fought back, and they had won. Admiral Reeves stood before a screen displaying the incoming Council fleet, his expression unreadable. "This is it," he said quietly. "It's time to send a message they can't ignore." Taylor, standing beside him, nodded. "They may have the numbers, but we have the will." Reeves turned to face her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Exactly. And that's something they'll never have. Now get to your station. We're going to show them what Earth can do." The Aegis and the other Earth ships moved into position, ready to meet the Council's fleet head-on if it came to that. The tension in the air was palpable as both sides sized each other up. But instead of the hostile confrontation that everyone expected, the Council's flagship sent a simple, almost mocking message. "Admiral Reeves," the voice of the Council's envoy came over the comms. "We've come to assist your forces. You are clearly outmatched and outgunned. We've extended this olive branch to avoid unnecessary conflict. Will you accept our assistance, or shall we consider this an act of aggression?" Reeves didn't hesitate for a moment. "The only assistance we need is your removal from our space. You've had your chance to help Earth, and you've done nothing but watch from the sidelines. Now you will respect our independence. We don't need your help." There was a long pause, the silence almost suffocating. Taylor looked over at Reeves, her expression one of concern. "Do you think they'll back down?" Reeves stared at the screen, his face hard. "No, but they'll have to decide how far they're willing to push. We've already proven ourselves to the galaxy, and I won't let them dictate our future." The tension grew even thicker as the Council fleet's ships began to maneuver, their weapons powering up. It seemed as though the meeting was going to end in conflict. But just as the situation seemed to be on the brink of war, something unexpected happened. The Aegis's sensors flared to life, detecting a new presence in the system. A fleet, unlike any Earth had seen before, appeared on the edge of the system. The ships were massive, their designs unlike anything humanity could comprehend. "Admiral," Lieutenant Taylor shouted, "we're picking up strange readings. That fleet, it's not the Council's reinforcements. It's something else." The ships were enormous, unlike anything Earth had ever seen. They'd radiated an overwhelming power, a presence that made even the mighty Council fleet seem insignificant in comparison. As the ships approached, the Council fleet hesitated, their formation faltering. The message that came through the comms was brief and direct. "We've been watching. Humanity will not be threatened." Reeves's heart skipped a beat. The voice was unfamiliar, but there was no mistaking the weight behind the words. Someone else had entered the equation. "Admiral," Taylor said softly, "it looks like we have allies." Reeves nodded slowly, a sense of relief washing over him. For the first time in this war, humanity had found someone who understood their resolve. And the Council, for all its power, had just learned that Earth wasn't alone. The ships from the mysterious fleet moved into formation, positioning themselves between the Earth fleet and the Galactic Council. It was a powerful statement, a message to both the Council and to the galaxy. Humanity was not alone, and they were not going to be intimidated. The Council, realizing the situation had shifted in an unexpected direction, faltered. They had no choice but to pause, reassess, and reconsider their next move. Admiral Reeves watched the scene unfold before him, his expression determined. The path ahead was still unclear, but for the first time, he felt a sense of hope. Earth had proven itself to the galaxy. And now, with new allies by their side, humanity's future looked brighter than ever. As the screen faded to black, Reeves's words were simple but full of meaning. "This is just the beginning."